Hello everybody, and welcome to the best builds for all survivors using the command artifact. I'll separate the builds here into two different categories: progression-based builds and for fun or meme builds. The way I see it, if you use the artifact of command, you are doing so for only one of those two reasons: to either get as ridiculously strong as possible, or to simply have fun and test some silly ideas out. I should also make note here that the builds I will go over are based on using only the command artifact, because as soon as you throw in the glass or sacrifice artifacts, for example, the order in which you prioritize certain items will change. Make sure you understand the context of your run and adapt accordingly. Let's begin here with the only progression-based build you will ever need, which I will simply call the build. It revolves entirely around getting your proc chains up and running as fast as possible, as proc chains are what deal the vast majority of your overall damage in any run. If you're unsure what I'm talking about, I have an entire video dedicated to the topic here. But don't just take my word for it. Allow the man himself, Poo, to tell you what this build is all about. Alright, Clover, I guess. Man, I haven't picked an ATG in a while. Let's go ATG. Ukulele isn't that good, but alright. As you could tell from the 10 out of 10 excellent copy pasta from Mr. Hopu, this build is almost exactly the same every single time, regardless of which survivor you are playing. This, again, is just because proc chains are that powerful. Here's what you do. Your first 6 or 7 common items are crit glasses. Everything in the game, save for damage over time, scales with crits, so it's an obvious choice to get a good amount of it as soon as possible. Since you're getting a bunch of crit, grab 1 stack of both a Predatory Instincts and Harvester's Scythe for your first green items. Both of those will give you an invisible 5% crit on top of their usual benefits. If you're playing an auto attack based survivor like Commando or Multi, consider grabbing another stack of Predatory to scale your attack speed a bit more. Next, throw in a Ukulele either before or after the Harvester and Predatory, depending on how comfortable you are with your current AoE. However, even if you have more than enough AoE built into your abilities for the early game, do not skip the Ukulele, as it is imperative to have for your upcoming proc chain madness. For commons, after the crit glasses, get mobility next. I opt to go for the goat hooves on everybody, regardless of if they can sprint and attack at the same time, because hooves are simply more consistent. Stop at about 6 stacks. As you're picking up the hooves, any greens you get should go into ATG missiles, as they're the best scaling on-hit item in the game for damage. Up until now, you've probably found at least one equipment barrel, and I'd recommend a damage-based one that can, surprise, surprise, proc your items, so the Prayon, Somerang, or your best option, the Royal Capacitor. Spinel Tonic and missile launchers are also an excellent choice. However, I would avoid them until you get at least a couple field cells or a Gesture of the Drowned. Once you have 2 or 3 stacks of ATG missiles, grab one of both of the fire and ice bands, as they are necessary to have at the end of a proc chain. You should now roughly be around stage 4 with either the legendary chest on Abyssal Depths or the alloy Worshipina on Siren's Call. Either way, it's time for your first guaranteed red item, which is going to be none other than the 57 leaf clover. If you already had a red item drop beforehand, you should instead take the sentient meat hook, as it is also imperative to have for the big boy proc chains to occur. Once you are at this point, you will start to see just how powerful the proc chains are. The run now turns into keeping this level of damage up and scaling it as high as possible. You should now look at the defense side of things. Start with stacking some teddy bears and some topaz brooches. I like to stop at 10 teddy bears for an exact 60% chance to block, and anywhere from 5 to 8 brooches depending on how much HP I have. Remember, the more HP you have, the more brooches you need to maintain the barrier. Also, for more mobility, grab 1 or 2 Hopu feathers and wax quells, as the momentum you already have from the goat hooves and energy drinks is more than enough for the entire run. And finally, in the damage department, I like to start getting my death mark procs up and going as soon as I reach like stage 5. To do this, you'll need a death mark, obviously, but right now only take 1 stack. At the time of recording, the additional 50% increase to damage is not applied at all for the additional stacks of death mark, so do not pick up more than 1 until this is fixed. And by the way, it's been confirmed by the devs that it is bugged, and they will fix it with the upcoming hotfix. To proc the death mark most consistently, take a couple stacks of tri-tips. Remember, you have a clover, so you'll apply the bleed with a small amount of stacks with no issue, a chrono bobble, and an ice band. Despite both debuffs being a slow from the bobble and the ice band, they're actually different values and therefore different debuffs. Each count separately towards the 4 required debuffs to proc the death mark. Finally, grab a Shattering Justice as your next legendary item, and voila, essentially instant death mark procs on any and every target. Once you get perma death marks, it's a good idea to get a Zerker Pauldron for the movement and attack speed, as you'll pretty much be always killing 3 or more targets, as well as 5 or so sticky bombs, because again, it's nice to have them at the end of a proc chain. Past this point, just fill in your gaps as necessary. Do you need a little more survival survivability? Grab a few more teddies, sights, or movement speed items. Do you want even more damage? Get a Gesture of the Drowned and some fuel cells and start abusing, scaling, your equipment of choice. Toss in a Warhorn at this point too for even more attack speed. Sprinkle in a little Soulbound Catalyst, Will-o'-the-Wisp, Brilliant Behemoth, Ceremonial Daggers, Resonance Disc, you get the idea. Now, you may be wondering why I haven't mentioned the guillotines yet. After all, they are one of the strongest green items in the game, so when should you take them? Well, being able to choose all of your items warrants some different context for the guillotine. Usually, the issue with elites is that once you start getting Malachites and Celestines, you generally don't have enough damage to take them out in a reasonable amount of time. But when you are literally choosing everything, you'll be able to plow right through any and every elite monster that comes your way, regardless of the execute from the guillotines. I'd recommend beginning to stack guillotines only once you enter your third loop and beyond, as if you follow the build correctly, you'll have plenty of damage to deal with them. Why waste another potential ATG, Will-o'-the-Wisp, or Fuel Cell, items that affect everything, on a guillotine that only affects one specific type of monster? The same train of thought applies to the Repulsion Armor. It's a very good item to get early on into your runs, however, it scales very poorly, so why bother picking it up at all if it's just going to become obsolete? Teddy bears are always useful and undoubtedly better to stack than Repulsion, despite the flat damage reduction of the Repulsion being better initially. Alright, here is what your final build should look like. The exact stack counts for the items may vary, depending on, how many items of that rarity you got, but I'd say you should have all of this up and going by like stage 7 or 8. In the damage department, make sure you have capped crit with at least one scythe and predatory. Pick up more predatories for more attack speed and not soldier syringes, as you will get more than enough attack speed with your Zerker Pauldrons and Warhorns added in. You need a minimum of 1 fire and 1 ice band, as well as 5 sticky bombs. The rest of your on-hit should go into the ATG missiles for your single target damage. You also need at least 2 ukuleles and Will-o'-the-Wisp for proc chaining. A meat hook, Shattering Justice, and Clover are the only 3 necessary quote-unquote red items, but Soulbound Catalyst, Behemoths, Ceremonial Daggers, etc. are also good red options, but you do need those primary 3. Finally, the Death Mark. Make sure you have at least 4 separate debuffs to proc it, and that some survivors have these debuffs built into their kits. The easiest way to ensure it's proc is with a couple tri-tip daggers, 1 chrono bobble, and the ice band and Shattering Justice that you already have. In the survivability department, make sure you have enough brooches for permanent barrier, which will be anywhere from 5 to 10 or more depending on your HP, that you have 10 or more teddy bears, and a solid amount of movement speed with at least 1 Hopu feather and wax quell on top. And that's pretty much the build. Obviously, you can throw many more items into the mix and see some good results, such as focus crystals on melee survivors, crowbars for some royal capacitor shenanigans, etc. This is just the baseline of what will always work due to proc chaining being the core foundation of any run. Also, this build does account for survivors that struggle with consistent ways to proc things like Artificer and Accurate, because once you get everything up and going, you only need 1 proc to wipe out the entire screen. Consistency doesn't matter nearly as much. However, if you find their kits to provide not enough oomph while you're still building up the run, consider grabbing a Visions of Heresy, which replaces your default attack with a ranged one. This will help tremendously with the feel of the build on those survivors. Alright, let's move on here to an example of a meme build. This will be the only build I explain because after all, you can literally do anything you want with the command artifact, so there's no possible way that I can think of all of the stuff you guys are going to try. This build is called the Ultra Tank. It consists of stacking Topaz brooches, Repulsion armor, and Razor Wire with a perma uptime Jade Elephant, so you can AFK while dishing out reflect damage with the Razor Wires. You get permanent barrier from the brooches, doubling your HP pool, essential immunity to small hits with Repulsion armor, and a massive 83% damage reduction from everything else with Jade Elephant. I've only tested this build on Multi and Mercenary due to chat telling me to take the Metamorph artifact portal towards the end of the run, and it's actually hilarious. Multi is definitely the best choice for this build because he gets 2 equipment slots, meaning you can take a Jade and a Hellfire tincture and swap between them to always be firing off your Razor Wire. The self damage from Hellfire is essentially negated from your Jade and Repulsions, but you'll always be taking at least 1 damage from it, so you'll always be throwing out the Razor Wires. Now, you can't only rely on Razor Wire for the damage because it doesn't actually get any increase to its damage per stack, just the radius and targets hit, so you'll need to have more or less the build as well. So capped crit, tons of on-hit items, etc. The difference with the Ultra Tank build is that you don't actually have to use an ability to kill something. You just need to stand near them and stare. Yes, stare into their souls. And that about does it with the best builds using the command artifact. Again, anything is possible with command, so let me know what your favorite thing to do is with it in the comments below. You can follow my stream over at twitch.tv/Woolie Gaming and consider joining our Discord server as well. Thank you for watching, and remember, Clover is always a good choice.